I worked as a ranger in one of the most haunted parks in the US. I have some strange stories. I ran out the door as sirens and flashing lights covered the streets. Police swarmed the area with their guns drawn, telling me to put my hands up and walk forward slowly. They found no trace of the kidnappers or of my wife. Soon, Antonio showed up with 2 FBI agents standing to his side. They saw me, sitting there on the curb, my head hung low, my eyes wet. The agents gave away nothing behind their sunglasses, both in black suits with clean-shaven faces and short hair. The sheriff showed up and pulled them to the side. I saw him pointing at the house and talking faster and faster, his eyes a mixture of uncertainty and fear. Clouds the color of nicotine stains passed slowly overhead, and I felt my energy draining, my mind running low. I knew I might never see my wife alive again. I might never see her dead, for that matter. The woods in the area seemed endless and vast, and many people simply disappeared, never to be found. Their bodies likely lay at the bottom of lakes or deep down in the dirt of national parks, far off the trails where the eyes of tourists wouldn't roam. So what do you know? I asked them, raising my head as they approached. I dried my eyes, blinking fast, steeling myself and trying to raise my will. Well, Antonio said, we found multiple sets of fingerprints in the cabin. Only one belonged to the dead suspect, and the victims were eliminated, at least those with fingers left. However, when we checked the footage of the park to try to find evidence relating to the crimes, we saw you pulling out and being followed. My heart stopped in my chest. I hadn't known or suspected anything at the time. They might even have someone watching me right now. But why hadn't they taken me? Why hadn't they just killed me, or at least tried to? Why just take my wife? I thought I might find out sooner than I expected. As the situation cooled down, and my wife's trail got colder by the minute, I was taken aside by Sheriff Cowles and Antonio Brown. They looked uncomfortable. Antonio massaged his walrus mustache repeatedly, a sign of anxiety I had seen before. The sheriff looked around the street, as if hoping to find my wife just randomly stumbling out of a nearby building, drunk and confused but certainly alive. Sheriff Cowles was a skinny and unassuming man. His body showed signs of lifelong alcoholism. Burst capillaries ran along the length of tanned face, and his nose looked like a patchwork of red trails. But in his face, his dark eyes showed intelligence, and on his extremely skinny body, he proudly displayed his badge, the star looking dull and lifeless under the thick, dirty clouds that covered our town. I felt the first drops of rain hit me on the top of my head. They felt like tears, as if even the sky had started to cry to join me in my loss. Well, Sheriff Cowles said, trying to form a smile. It failed miserably, and he went back to frowning and looking around at the houses, avoiding eye contact with me. We have some good news, Mr. Lorenzo. I looked at him expectantly. He cleared his throat. First, we have solid fingerprint evidence from the scene. We are almost positive the fingerprints collected nearby are not from any victims. We tried running them through state and federal databases, but... He shook his head, sighing. No leads yet. Don't give up hope though. These things take time. The car that followed you was reported stolen sometime last night. It might be a dead end, but if we can find video footage in the area, we might be able to connect the stolen car to the murders and kidnapping of your wife. We have state and federal police on that right now. Your neighbors didn't report seeing or hearing anything, at least not anyone we have interviewed yet. We're still going through, but as we get further from the house, it becomes less likely that anyone will have seen much more than a car, if that. Your neighbor across the street, however, has a doorbell camera installed, and we're currently reviewing that evidence. It's only a matter of time before we catch these scumbags, I'll tell you that. They've left far too much evidence behind. It doesn't look like a professional job. That means they'll probably make more mistakes along the way, and we'll find and use every single one to make sure your wife gets returned, unharmed. I still didn't look at him, but stared blankly at the road ahead of me. The rain started falling harder. Antonio went to his car, grabbing an umbrella and standing beside me, shielding him and me from the dirty rain. It's only a matter of time, I said, until they kill my wife, too. You realize that? Time is not a factor on our side. As she gets further away and the trail becomes colder, the chance of finding any part of her ever again rapidly drops to zero. You're right, Antonio said, moving his huge body closer to me as lightning and thunder started. Echoing booms spread across the street. Many of the agents and police went to their cars for umbrellas, or went inside the house. Any trace evidence on the street or lawn would wash away to nothing after a few minutes of this. Most likely, it already had. Why do you think we're all here? We're doing everything we can to keep the trail hot. Do you have any ideas, Cal? Any ideas at all? Don't be afraid to tell us. Nothing is too outlandish. Hell, I'd call up a psychic if I actually thought it might help us find her. I thought maybe we could try using you as bait, Sheriff Cowell said. If they followed you once, perhaps they'll do it again. I nodded. That's a good idea, I said. It's worth a shot. But I think we need to go back to the park, where this all started. That's where we will find the answers. And as the police work wound its way forward through bureaucracy and uncertainty, we ultimately did go back to the park. Sheriff Cowell stayed at the site for a while, stating he couldn't leave just yet. I gave him my cell phone number and the number for the ranger's station at the park and told him to call me if he figured out anything. He promised he would and shook my hand, the thin bones of his long fingers wrapping around my palm as I stared into his bleary eyes. He didn't stare back, but looked away quickly. Though this happened years ago, I still remember how he refused to look me in the face, and to this day, I wonder how much he really knew. Certainly, in hindsight, it was far more than he let on at the time. Antonio called up a few rangers, explaining the situation and asking them if they would help. They readily agreed, and he said he would pay them overtime for their help. Within half an hour, we had 5 rangers at the station, all armed with shotguns and rifles from the armory. We couldn't exactly close the whole park, which ranged over 200 square miles and included campgrounds and nature reserves, but the area near the cabin had been sealed off and manned by police. Antonio explained the situation as quickly as he could. The other rangers looked at me with eyes of sadness, and some tried to avoid looking at me altogether. I kept seeing my wife in my mind, her smiling face and beautiful green eyes, looking like polished circles of emerald. We will break into 2 groups, Antonio said, handing me a 20-gauge shotgun and a backpack. I found water and snacks as well as some boxes of buckshot and shotgun slugs inside. I'll go with Caldine, you come with us as well. He motioned to a young ranger, extremely tall and skinny with strange tattoos of pyramids and eyes and half-animal gods all down his arms. He usually covered them up when at work. What are we actually expecting to find? Another ranger asked, an older woman named Allie. Bodies? Lunatics. Are we looking for more cabins? The entire thing is somewhat fuzzy, I guess. And where are the police? Shouldn't we have police escorts as well? Look, the police did a scan of the area, Antonio said, frowning slightly at her. We shouldn't find anything dangerous. We're just looking for evidence. Anything dropped, any disturbed trails in the vicinity of the cabin that the police may have missed, drops of blood, dead or mutilated animals. I don't really know what we will find, if anything. I doubt it will be dangerous though. Looking back on it now, a chill runs down my spine when I think about just how wrong he turned out to be. Night had started to come again, too soon. We used bright LED flashlights on the trail, speaking little through the misery of the cold rain. All of us had ponchos on, but the wind began to pick up, blowing the rain sideways and into my face and clothes. I swore under my breath. What an absolutely horrible, miserable day. Dean stayed close by my side, talking sporadically. He tried to cheer me up, talking about jokes and the news and the stock market. I mostly grunted and nodded, feeling dissociated and unreal, like I was in a dream. Then his conversation took a bizarre turn. Have you ever seen, or heard, I guess, heard too, anything really weird in this park? Dean asked, looking sideways at me. He looked much younger in his uncertainty, like a teenager trying to ask for a dance with a pretty girl but uncertain how to go about it. I sighed, realizing he would not leave me alone. Part of me also realized he had volunteered to come out here in the middle of the night solely to help me, and that he may even end up risking his life on this mission if things went sour. But I still felt a childish spitefulness about having to interact. Yes, I've heard some weird stuff, I said. I also saw a carpet made of human skin. I guess that qualifies as weird. It does, Dean nodded, but it's not, like, supernatural weird. I mean, have you ever seen a ghost, or a demon, or anything like that? I paused for a very long moment. Antonio walked in front of us, grunting and keeping his gun raised. The illumination from the flashlight attachment bouncing crazily off the trees and making the shadows of the branches look like arms, stretching out in the woods to grab whatever they could. I looked over at him. His face had a very serious expression on it, unusual for Dean, and he avoided eye contact. What is this about? I asked. Have you seen a ghost here? Is that what you're trying to tell me? Well, Dean said, looking away into the trees, shining his flashlight at nothing for good measure, I'm not sure. I definitely saw something strange during the night shift one time. I thought, at the time, maybe it was, like, I don't know, a homeless guy on meth who was just really weird and crazy looking. But I was patrolling the trails for poachers and trespassers when someone just started screaming. I was nearly 5 miles away from the ranger station, in the middle of nowhere, and the trail itself was rarely traveled except by hunters. My first thought was that it was a fox, or some injured animal. They can sound very human when they scream, you know. I nodded. But it followed me, and kept following me as I went down the trail. I turned, trying to see what the hell it was. I called out, identifying myself as a ranger and telling them they were trespassing, that the trail was closed for the night and the police were on their way. It seemed like the person, or whatever they were, just kept screaming, as if they didn't need to breathe. I've never heard anything like it. They just didn't stop. It went on for minutes, and then suddenly cut out. But ahead of me, on the trail, I saw something naked. It looked kinda like a person, but their body was skin and bones, and so pale that it almost glowed. I could see every bone, every rib. Its head was down, and it just stood there with this eerie smile on their face. No hair anywhere, no eyebrows, no pubic hair, no chest hair, not even a hair on their head. Now I guess they could just shave really well every day, but your eyebrows. I mean, I don't know. People are strange, I guess. And then it raised its head, and I saw the eyes were missing. Just cut out of its face. Black sockets seemed to stare at me, as if they could still see me. I don't see how. Blood trickled from the empty sockets, and its smile widened. "Oh Dean," it said to me, "your mother says the water is fine. Come on in, Dean. She's waiting for you. My mother died by drowning in Lake Winnipesaukee when I was 10. No one really knows about it, because I don't talk about it." She hit her head on the side of the boat and fell out. My dad had been pulling donuts in the middle of the lake, trying to make me laugh, and my mom just lost her balance or something and, well, by the time they dragged her body out, she didn't look like my mom anymore. Blue lips and swollen skin, and the fishes had started to nip at her and tear her apart. Now how could this random guy in the middle of the woods with no eyes have known, and be waiting for me? And after he said it, he ran towards me. I immediately reached for my bear mace, then realized it might not work so well on someone without eyes, though I guess if I got it in his mouth and nose he would still drop. But I turned to run, and a few seconds later I looked back, and he was gone. Dean shuddered. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. I checked my back every couple seconds on the way to the station, and I called on the walkie-talkie for help, but I just got static and screams back. And I swear, I was totally sober when it happened. I wasn't dreaming or anything, I hadn't even had a beer in over a week. It really happened, Cal. There's something in these woods, something strange and inhuman. I nodded, about to respond when we heard the first skittering of footsteps from behind us. I stopped, motioning to Dean. He whispered something to Antonio. I saw Antonio's sweaty face glancing back and forth, looking down the trail with wide eyes. Then I heard it again, the snapping of a twig, the slight rustling of brush. "Identify yourselves," I yelled. "We are park rangers, and this is a police investigation. You are currently trespassing in a restricted area. This area is closed until the state agency clears it for reopening. If you identify yourselves and leave the area immediately, you won't be in any trouble." I waited. Nothing happened at first. Then a soft, low chuckling started from the darkness. My shotgun had a flashlight attachment, and I shone the bright LED light in the direction of the laughter. From behind the bushes, I saw the flash of an inhuman hand. The fingers looked crooked and far too long, the skin blackened and covered with weeping sores. Then it withdrew into the brush, and more laughter started from all sides of the trail. "You are not at home, Rangers," a mocking voice said. "This is our home now. You are trespassing on holy ground. The penalty for that is death." Antonio raised his rifle, screaming at the voice. "Come on and try it, fuckface," he yelled, his face flushed and his large body quivering with rage and fear. "You maniacs are due for a lesson in what happens to people who fuck with rangers." The laughter grew louder, more intense, and figures started to come out of the shadows and bushes. Stepping out from behind trees and appearing from the huge rocks standing all over the park. All had the same blackened skin and thin, long limbs. They looked like demons who had stepped out of hell. And perhaps they were. Without hesitation, I opened fire, and they ran forwards, hissing and shrieking, their naked, sickly bodies and fire-blackened skin approaching closer with every moment.